The recording will be available in our office's YouTube channel, so please don't forget to subscribe, and we'll put that link in the chat. And a reminder, you are all more than welcome to use the chat, emojis, anything like that, to engage with the panel throughout this discussion. Before we get started, I'd like to start us off with a land acknowledgement. And I'd just like to note that this land acknowledgement was actually written by our student program coordinator, Lila Crank. We invite you to take a moment to reflect on your relationship to this land of Boulder and relationship to local Indigenous communities as we are guided by the university's land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state and in stewardship to land before the establishment of the state into this present moment. CU Boulder humbly acknowledges that it is located on the traditional and current homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native nations and communities. The violent forced removal of Native people from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. These histories have brought us to the present moment wherein the University of Colorado Boulder is determined to commit to improving and enhancing relationships with Indigenous communities and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with Native communities to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Patricia will be putting some resources for you all in the chat. And I don't think I even introduced myself in the beginning. I'm so sorry. My name is Marisha Lopez. I am the program manager for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the College of Arts and Sciences. And now I will pass it over to Dr. Patricia Gonzalez.
Thank you so much, Marisha. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. My name is Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, and you are welcome to call me Patricia. I use the pronoun she, her, ella, and I am the Assistant Dean for Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion in the College of Arts and Sciences. And so the purpose of today is truly to dive into a deeper conversation of what it means to support our Latine students. And so before we do that, I just want to give you all some insight about what we're talking about, why there is urgency for these types of conversations, and why we're creating space to just have those conversations with you all today. So it has been predicted that by 2050, over 1/3 of Coloradans will be Hispanic, comprising the largest share of Colorado's racially and ethnically marginalized populations. Today's panel will discuss how CU Boulder and the community members, our community, can support Coloradans, Latinx students in the community, and also at CU Boulder. And so before I get started, I just want to clarify that for the purpose of today's conversation, we'll use Latine, but you will also hear Latinx, Hispanic, and other terms used. And so before we get started, I just want to highlight that Hispanic refers to any of the peoples in the Americas and Spain who speak Spanish or are descended from Spanish-speaking communities. It was coined in the 1970s by the U.S. Census Bureau to offer a pan-ethnic name for people such as Puerto Ricans, Mexican Americans, Cuban Americans, and others whose social, economic, and political needs were often ignored. And so just want to highlight that when we hear Hispanic serving institution, we will not change it to Latin serving institutions. We'll keep it as that. But also want to highlight that according to Professor of Sociology at UC Berkeley, Cristina Mora, states before the term Hispanic was adopted, the census would often check off people such as Mexican Americans as white on the census, which is why it's important to acknowledge also some of that history. I also want to highlight that Latinx and Latine are both gender-neutral versions of Latino and Latina, whose O and A endings correspond to the masculine and feminine form traditionally assigned to nouns and adjectives in the Spanish language. And before I also move on, I want to center the fact that we are not here to gatekeep what anyone here in this space identifies as. I personally identify as Chicana, Mexican, and so I just want to amplify that if you identify with Latino, Latina, Latinx, Chilango, Chilanga, Chicana, Chicano, any of the terms that speak to you. We're not here to gatekeep that. So we want to acknowledge the fact that there are also individuals who may identify with different terms, and including Latino, Hispanic, Latinx. And we're also acknowledging that some of those communities have expressed concerns with these terms being made up in academic and academic spaces. And so just want to make sure that you are welcome to show up the fullness of yourself. And so if you use any of these terms or none of these terms, we also welcome that as well. But just wanted to make sure that everyone is on the same page when we're referring to Latine and also to Latinx or Hispanic during our conversation. And that also goes for our panel. And so with that, I am going to also pass it over to Marisha, who's going to introduce our moderator for today, Dr. Sonia DeLuca Fernandez.
Sonia DeLuca Fernandez serves CU Boulder as the university's Senior Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She provides strategic direction for campus-wide DEI initiatives and strategies for improving the campus culture. DeLuca Fernandez earned a doctorate of philosophy in higher education from the University of Michigan and a master's degree in social foundations of education and a bachelor's degree in African American studies, both from the University of Iowa. So welcome, Sonia. And while you are introducing our panelists, I will start spotlighting them.
Thanks so much, Marisha. And I'm so excited for this event today. Thank you very much. I have the distinct pleasure of providing some short biographies of our distinguished panelists. And so we can highlight their fabulousness and accomplishments. I'd like to start first with introducing Dr. Deandra Mull, who is our Vice Chancellor, excuse me, for Student Affairs at CU Boulder. For more than 20 years, Dr. Mull has served the field of higher education and student affairs, leading organizations and initiatives that uplift and enable a comprehensively excellent student experience. Throughout her tenure and beyond the traditional classroom setting, she has sought to create educational environments in which all students can engage, transform, and thrive as active citizens in an evolving global society. Prior to joining CU Boulder, Dr. Mull served as Vice President for Student Life at the University of Florida. In addition, Dr. Mull has held numerous executive and senior leadership positions within the Division of Student Life at The Ohio State University. She is a first-generation college student who earned a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Criminal Justice from Kent State University, a Master of Arts in Higher Adult and Lifelong Education from Michigan State University, and a PhD in Educational Policy and Leadership from The Ohio State University. Welcome and thank you, Dr. Mull. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Daryl Joji Maeda, Dean and Vice Provost of Undergraduate Education at CU Boulder. Dr. Maeda is devoted to fostering a rich and supportive, inclusive learning environment in which all undergraduate students can thrive. As a champion for undergraduate students, he leads student success initiatives and is involved in the development of recruitment and student support strategies that enable CU Boulder to recruit, retain, and graduate a highly diverse and competitive undergraduate student body. He oversees campus-wide academic programs, including the Program in Exploratory Studies, University Exploration and Advising Center, Student Academic Success Center, and the President's Leadership Class. Dr. Maeda has been a faculty member at CU Boulder since 2005. Prior to his current position, he served as the Associate Dean for Student Success in the College of Arts and Sciences and the Chair of the Department of Ethnic Studies. He holds a PhD in American Culture from the University of Michigan, an MA in Ethnic Studies from San Francisco State University, and a BS in Mathematics from Harvey-Mudd College. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Maeda. Finally, I'd like to introduce Nick Lopez, President and CEO of the Latin American Educational Foundation. Lopez is a native of Colorado, born and raised in Pueblo, home of the most fabulous chiles. That was not written down, that's my editorial. As a first-generation college student, he believes deeply in advancing educational opportunities for all Colorado Latino and Latina students. Prior to accepting this leadership position at LAIF, Lopez served as the Vice President of Advancement and Marketing at Volunteers of America, Colorado, overseeing their statewide fundraising, marketing, and community engagement efforts. He's also served as the Executive Director of the St. Joseph Hospital Foundation, where he led their philanthropic efforts in support of the 145-year mission of the hospital, including the administration of their nursing scholarship program. Lopez brings over 20 years of experience in philanthropy, strategic planning, and nonprofit leadership. He also has a background in higher education, having worked in various roles at the University of Chicago and the University of Denver. He earned his BA in anthropology from the University of Chicago and a MS in public service management from DePaul University. Thank you and welcome. I get to jump right in to the meatiest of meaty questions. Something that if you've been around our area for a while might sound familiar to you. Last year, NBC Latino published an article reporting that CU Boulder has one of the largest gaps between Latina undergraduate students coming to college for the first time and the state's share of Latina high school graduates. That gap is over 15%. This is not unusual for flagship institutions, though they pointed to an unwelcoming environment and high tuition to explain the gap. I'm wondering if we could start off with Deandra, your thoughts on either that piece or what we're doing to address campus climate inclusion while we talk about the importance of diversity.
Thank you, Sonia. So yes, I did go back and read the article. I've been here for about 3.5 months at this point. And so coming in, I certainly understood Colorado as a state's population and also looked at our numbers on campus as we think about our underserved and underrepresented populations. I think that the article did point out that we have work to do. We certainly know that the University of Colorado Boulder as a flagship institution has made some good strides with regard to recruiting, but we're not where we could be with even more intentional focusing. So I do believe that it's important to note that. I don't want to pretend that we've done all these great things and there's not any more work to be done. There is. Part of that comes down to how do you create a sense of belonging for students? Diversity is a fact. If we look at our national data, we look at where the country is going to be heading here, where it's already heading, we know that our communities are going to be in diversity, increasing with regard to diversity. For us, what does that mean for us to center the student experience? We have ways we can do that. What most stands out to me is I think about how we create wraparound services. How are we making sure that when students are applying to university, they see themselves? Mirrors matter. I firmly believe that mirrors matter for the student experience, whether it's in our faculty and staff, whether it's in our student body, whether it's in our publications and our communications to students. So we have really good work that we could do to get us more to that space. When we talk about the idea that it was seen as unwelcoming, what are the barriers that our students are telling us make them feel that way? We need to spend some time while we are a data-driven institution. How are we hearing from our students to tell us why they feel that way? I know for me as an African-American student who, when I was searching for colleges, it certainly was important to me to walk onto a campus and feel seen, heard, and validated right off the bat. I would imagine for student groups, no matter where they're coming from, that still matters if we're looking at data points. So for us, what can we do to eliminate the barriers? How can we talk to the students who are telling us they don't feel welcome? And secondly, how can we hold truer to the idea of being more of a mirror for the state's population? Again, this is a problem that we have nationally with regard to our underrepresentation of underserved student populations. And for Boulder, how do we work together as a partnership to make sure that we're putting into place those services that make sure the students get where they need? Can we have some translation services? I know there are many universities that translate various materials in different ways. I know we do that at some levels here. Are we wrapping in our parent groups? Are we making sure that, again, when students come in, they feel welcome from day when they are even applying, so before they even get here, and once they're here, that we've actually created an environment where they feel they can stay? getting them here just isn't that's not the end goal. We need to get them here, retain them, make them feel welcome, because at the end of the day, we don't want our students, regardless of where they're coming from, to leave simply as graduates. We want them to leave as engaged alumni. And we have a lot of work that we can do on our front end to make sure that that is in fact what's happening for them when they're here.
Thanks so much for that. Daryl, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, Dr. Mull, you're a better student than I am. I didn't go back and read the article as homework. So, by the way, I do go by he, him pronouns, and I'm really, really proud of all of the work that Arts and Science is doing. I want to recognize Dr. Gonzalez. Thank you for, for all of the work that you've done. You've come here and hit the ground running. Marisha, it's great to see you in this new role. And so I really appreciate being able to come together for this conversation. So I don't know, about the accuracy of the article, not having read it, but I do vouch for the numbers that are quoted. It is true that that we are about 14 to 15% Latinx students, and that the proportion of high school graduates who are Hispanic is about a third in the state. So we definitely have a long ways to go when it comes to recruiting, retaining, supporting, and graduating Latinx students here at CU Boulder. So two of the things that the question asked are about an unwelcoming environment and high tuition. So one of the things that I'd like to highlight is that we are making significant strides, not nearly fast enough and not nearly far enough, on the question of affordability for students whose families are not able to make large contributions to their educational costs. So this year is the first year that the CU Promise has been, the CU Promise Scholarship has been extended to, I believe, to all Pell eligible students. And the CU Promise actually covers full cost of tuition. Now, of course, we know that full cost of tuition is not the same as full cost of attendance, but nevertheless, I think that's a really important little piece of progress that we've made. I see in the comments that somebody mentioned that we need to engage with the city and county of Boulder. I think that's very true. CU Boulder doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists within a geographical and an urban or town context that isn't always the most welcoming to students of color. And there are lots of ways we can think of to address that. There are, of course, lots of benefits to establishing a critical mass of students so that they do not feel like they are the only ones on their hall or in a particular social setting out in the community. And that's one of the things that we can do as an institution, is really concentrate on upping our game when it comes to recruiting. But on the other hand, it is absolutely the case that we get all sorts of reports of students feeling uncomfortable or unwelcome in the community. And that's something that we need to work on in partnership with the city and county. I think it's really, I really appreciated the land acknowledgement that we began with, because it suggested that there's something to the territory that we occupy that puts us in a relationship of indebtedness to the people who have come before us. I'll just close by saying that here in Colorado, we stand not only on the territory that's been the traditional homes of Native people, but also in Aslan itself.
Thanks very much for that. Something that points to the university's potential that the article didn't address is not only does CU Boulder graduate the largest numbers of Latina undergraduates in the state, but CU Boulder also has the highest graduation rates of any institution in the state for Latina students. Nick, I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the unique challenges that Latinx students might face or experience in higher education.
Absolutely. Again, Nick Lopez with the Latin American Educational Foundation. He, him, his pronouns. I'll start just by giving a very quick primer on who we are at Allyship and the work that we do and how it ties into the work with the University of Colorado Boulder, a great partner of ours. So Allyship is a 75-year-old scholarship and student access organization here in Colorado. We are one of the oldest Latino Hispanic serving nonprofits in the state. Proud history and legacy of being that access point for education, really with a focus on first generation students and those who come from under-resourced communities. So again, we focus on providing scholarships. Our current scholarship class across Colorado, we support 128 scholars. 85% of them are first-gen college-going students. 90% are Pell Grant eligible, and we're really focusing on the enrollment to persistence to graduation, and even thinking a bit further school to career. And we are statewide, so we serve students across the state of Colorado. About 45% of our students come from the Denver metro area, 20% northern Colorado, 15% southern Colorado, 15% western slope, and the remaining 5% or so from the eastern plains. So we have a pretty good view statewide of the different challenges that our students are facing as they get to college, the advisement, the resources they need, the coaching that they need. But I'm also kind of a very much an asset-driven community leader, and I think it's always important to highlight the progress we've made holistically in the state of Colorado, just to give, I think, that larger context of how far we've come. Recently had Dr. Landon Mascarenas, who's the current chair of the board for the Colorado Community College System, make a presentation to our board this past July. And he shared some interesting data that I wanted to share just real quick to show that progress. So for our Latinx student population here in Colorado, our graduation rate has increased from 55% in 2010 to 75% in 2020. So we feel really good about that. Over that same period of time, Latino dropout rates fell 2.8%, so down by half. And the rate of those needing remedial college classes also dropped. Graduation rates, even looking at the Colorado Community College, I thought this was interesting because it's a good indicator of where we're going as we talk about four-year students. The Colorado Community College System's graduation rates rose to 31% from 15% from 5 years earlier. This is according to a report by the Complete College America that details 4- and 2-year college graduation rates at different state systems. And that graduation rates improved among students from all backgrounds, including Black, Hispanic students, who typically graduate at a lower rate than their peers. If we look at economics, and at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about what that future population growth looks like for the state of Colorado, knowing that by 2050, roughly a third of the state population is going to be Latino, Hispanic, Latina. As I often find myself telling our students, telling community partners, the future economic and social vitality of the state is inextricably linked to the success of the Latino community. And having said that, looking at what some of that economic progress and success has been for us is really important in framing this conversation. Poverty rates for Latino Coloradans have been falling to near historic lows. Of course, there's always those occasional interruptions from economic downturns. In the pandemic definitely had some impacts, but in 2021, 15% Latino poverty rate was still among the lowest recorded in recent data. That Latino white poverty gap roughly halved between 2011 and 2021. That was big progress for our community on the economic side. However, despite the falling poverty rates, Latino and Black Coloradans were still about twice as likely to live in poverty as white Coloradans. And Black and Latino children, in our foundation, we're looking a little further back than just high school and college. They were about 3 times likely to live in poverty as their white peers. So having said that, again, just trying to give some context how we think about things at Allyship. What we still see, though, as those challenges and those barriers, but really an opportunity for potential, the financial barrier still remains really, in our view, the top issue for our students and top obstacle. In 2019, this was cited by the Lumina Foundation, 71% of Latino undergraduate students receive some form of financial aid compared to 55% of white students. That's something that we're seeking to address. If you look at our work over the last 10, 15 years, our scholarship sizes have remained kind of static. $2,000, $3,000, sometimes $4,000 we can award to a student. Sometimes that gets matched by a host institution. We're really striving in the coming years to increase that to $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 per year awards for our students to help address those barriers. As I mentioned, 90% of our students are Pell Grant eligible. So that remains our core focus, and we still think that financial barrier is really a unique challenge within our community. And then something I wanted to address is representation barriers. I think that's unique for our students and what they're experiencing in college in Colorado. Representation of Latinos in higher education faculty and administration remains limited. According to a 2019 report by the National Center for Education Statistics, only 5.7% of full-time faculty in degree-granting post-secondary institutions identified as Hispanic or Latino. I think that's an issue our students still face. Is our rates of graduation can increase, their enrollment can increase, but once they're there, if they're not finding community, if they're not finding an opportunity to connect with those faculty, that poses real challenges for them at their campuses.
Thanks so much, Nick. That information is super important. We have some interest in the chat addressing some of those reasons. We can find some evidence in the last administration of the Campus Climate Survey, and I'll put a link in the chat for participants to be able to have an easy click to those results. But thinking about inclusion and belonging, Deandra's already introduced some strategies, but I'm wondering, Daryl, if you can build on those for additional steps that you think CU Boulder should take to do better for fostering an inclusive environment for Latinx students.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I'm very heartened by is that our university has started in on a process of changing the way we conceptualize how we relate to racially and ethnically minoritized students. I think for a long time, our university was very scared of talking about identity per se. But identity is so important because it points to our felt histories, our identifications with our cultures, with our communities, with our families. And so when I see the university creating the CAUSE, Center for African and African American Studies, and really equipping it as a place that unites research and teaching, and also the building of community among students, faculty, and staff. To me, that's a great model, because University of Colorado Boulder is not just a university, it's flagship research university. And so when we think about the benefits of coming to CU Boulder, chief among them is the fact that students can study with faculty who are experts in their fields, who are world-class, world-renowned leaders in generating new knowledge and fields. So I look at the cause and I think, what an opportunity we've created for students to connect with each other, with faculty who are doing cutting-edge research in this area, and with staff who are going to support them in their identity development. And so, by analogy, I think that we could really benefit from creating a center like the CAUSE that really concentrates on doing research, teaching, and community building around issues that impact Latinx students, Latinx, Hispanic students, again, sort of the wealth of ways that people identify. And again, I think that there's a benefit, right, to students to connect, as Nick just mentioned, with faculty whose experiences might be like theirs, might resemble theirs. There's an opportunity for staff, particularly student affairs staff, to come into those spaces and to be active parts of crafting a very rich relationship with students and faculty simultaneously, and to help students and student groups, right, to to develop along their journey of learning about their identities, understanding their identities, and then going beyond just their own identities to connect to some of the work that I think is so important, which is the work of building solidarity with other folks. But we can't do that unless we have a good, solid basis for understanding who we are and where we've come from. So that would be one strategy that I would definitely support and advocate for. And I can talk about academic support, and I'd like to do that, but I'll just hand it back at this point.
Thanks, Daryl. That's a perfect segue to that we can learn more about student affairs, some of Deandra's expertise, and also as she serves as a university leader. Deandra, if you could give us more of what you gave us the highlights of at the top of the program for how we should be doing things differently, better, to create a more inclusive environment.
Yes. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is I tend to talk when folks ask me how I believe universities universally can help to increase populations or resources and strategies for underserved communities. I think about it in the 4 M's: money, mirrors, moments, and mobility. I can't even talk today. So again, that would be the money, mirrors, moments, and mobility. So first, the money. Where are the resources that really help to make the student experience what it is? Resources come through the lens of also the elimination of barriers to access. If we know, as all the data has largely told us, that the population of Latine students typically will come from, when compared to their peers, groups in which resources are more limited, we have to make sure we're putting our resources and our money where our priorities are. Secondly, mirrors. How can Latine students see themselves as part of the community? This in the faculty and our staff and our students and our mentors and our alumni and future generations. I think about our publications and our communication. Someone mentioned how we do bilingual services as well. Those are going to be really critical because we know our Latine group is also a very diverse population in and of itself. For also with regard to the mirrors, how do they show up in our university's values? We know that representations matters, and this not only comes through the staff that we hire, but also the visual cues, the support, and the access. Dr. Maeda mentioned the creation of a center. What we've done in student affairs is take that very direct to say, how can we create student resources front and center that really do center the student experience? We have just posted a position for our affinity group, so African American, Latine, Asian American, and our Native American groups, to have those resources and those staff embedded directly in the Division of Student Affairs. We will partner directly with CAUSE because that's absolutely critical, as you mentioned, Dr. Maeda, to make sure the students can see themselves there. But in student affairs, that is the center of the student experience. We know when students come to the university, they don't just come for an education. They come for an educational experience. So we have to make sure, again, that we're offering a wraparound service and environment that really does say to them, again, when you leave, we don't want you to just leave with a degree on your wall. We want you to leave as proud of what you've been able to be here, proud of all the things that you've overcome here, proud of the fact that you are a part of this community. I posted that posting. I've listed that posting in the chat here as well. I would love for you all to share that. It's going to be really critical for us that we get an amazing crop of folks who want to come in and really serve and support our students. And so all the help that you can get, you all will know the community, similar to the fact that I know when there are folks who are looking across the country for Vice President of Student Affairs, I know folks who will be qualified for those, in my opinion. And so I forward those names. I really hope that you will. We also have to make sure that we're creating moments for our students when they arrive. How do we create an environment in which students know unequivocally that they are where they're supposed to be? How have we created such defining moments from day one? Starting with orientation, starting at when we're recruiting them and beyond. I strongly believe that recruiting efforts for all of our students have to happen far beyond their senior year of college. And so how do we make sure we're leaning back into our communities through the Division of Student Affairs? Are we doing service in communities that mimic the populations that we know that we need to support? Are we making sure we're having communications and proper ways to contact our parents in those communities? How are we making sure that, again, students feel valued, they feel engaged, they feel included, and they know that they matter? And then mobility. How do we tell students when they're coming in that they have somewhere to go from here? It's not just about the degree, and I will continue to say that throughout this call, but how do we make sure that they know they have career opportunities? How do we prepare them to give back perhaps to their families and their communities at large? How do we make sure that they're prepared for more than just simply coming in, leading with a degree and feeling as though that's the accomplishment. The accomplishment is the total being of the student experience. It's a total being of the fact that our students come in as whole beings, and we're here to help them develop that more. And so for me, making sure that in student affairs, we have ways that we are really creating a welcoming and inclusive environment from students from before they enter, but also through the point at which they leave, because we do want them to come back and also be those mirrors for their student and those next generations to come.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Deandra. You know, Nick, as we're hearing from Daryl and Deandra, I'm wondering your perspective and some of the conversations and advice that you're privy to around the state, what we can and should expect from university leaders, from faculty, from staff to support students. I'm always struck by having to correct assumptions, whether it's treating Latinx students as one monolithic group, or the assumption that all Latinx students are first gen. At CU Boulder, in any given year, it's between 30% and 42% are first generation students. And what are the assumptions we're making around that? What are some of the expectations and recommendations you have for employees at institutions like CU Boulder?
No, it's a great question. I appreciate it. I think from my perspective and the perspective of our foundation's work, for the university holistic leadership, staff, even other current students, is to establish a presence and the community engagement outside of campus. I think you have to go where these communities are thriving, experience them educationally, culturally. That's language, that's food, that's how families connect. I think something I'm always talking about with potential partners, whether it's with industry, higher education, how are you engaging the families of these students? How are you including them in their student success and understanding that dynamic? Oftentimes, at least in our experience, some of these students, parents in some ways are foregoing potential immediate economic opportunity for their families by saying, okay, mijo or mija is going to go to college, and we want to support that. So I think just having that presence outside of campus, engaging our students and other community partners who are really embedded in this work, to better understand those needs and to build that credibility and trust with our students. And I'll just quickly say to your point about, how much more diverse the Latino community in Colorado has become. You go back, just 15, 20 years, this was a predominantly Mexican-American, Chicano identifying community across the state, but it's much more diverse and rich than that. We are not a monolith. Puerto Rican, Dominican, Colombian, more and more we're seeing our community is diversifying within itself. So I think better understanding what it means to be a Latino or Latina student in this country who's arriving here from outside of it, and not necessarily through traditional means. How do you engage undocumented students, our dreamers? About a third of the students we support financially are undocumented dreamers, DACA. I think that has to be part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, great points. Thanks for that. Deandra, from your perspective, given, oh, I'm sorry, I got distracted. Someone was speaking. Given your perspective and some of how you outlined those 4 M's, what should all of us as your colleagues, faculty, staff, university leaders at the university be doing differently?
First of all, going off of mute. So I think that it's really important that we recognize how we play such a critical role in creating a sense of connectedness to the campus. Students are certainly going to look at us, whether we look like them or not, to make them feel welcome. We are also great recruiting agents. For me, I think that what I've learned more so than anything, and again, my own personal identities, is that students look to us to figure out also how they're going to be treated on campus. And so how do we make sure that we are serving in a space where we can honor? If we say this is a great place for students to be, we have to make it as such. So how are we also being intentional? If we see things that are barriers to that progress, how are we making sure that we're also putting those in a space where we can address them? I think a lot of times we look at things as perhaps being someone else's issue, when in reality, when the students come in, they're all of our not our issue, they're all of our students. And so when they're here, we have to create an environment that really does say to them, you are here because you belong. You are here because you earn these places, and you're here because it's our job to get you to the next place in your life. So for us, how do we make sure that we are serving as those frontline retention and recruitment agents in a way that honors the fact that, again, we still have work to do, but that we all are here to do it together? For me, that's really going to be important. Also, how do we partner with the Hispanic, Latine alumni? It will also be a key factor. I know I still go home to homecoming events every single year because what I gained from my university experience was one that made me feel connected. How do we make sure that our alumni also feel that they are intentionally being engaged in our recruitment and our retention of our students? It's critical. To know the road ahead, you ask those coming back. I learned that a long time ago. And so we know that if our alumni are not happy and they don't feel that they've been connected, they're not as likely to tell the next generation to come into the same space. So how are we connecting with communities, parents, families, community at large? How are we connecting with alumni? How are we connecting with students when they're here and before they get here? And how do we realize the value of relationships and keeping students feeling like they're front and centered in all that we do?
Yeah, agreed. I'm going to take a significant pivot for the last question that we're going to entertain for Daryl and Deandra. And Daryl, if you could start us off. We have a lot of conversation locally about HSI status. And for participants today, that stands for Hispanic Serving Institution. It's a federal designation based on proportion enrollment. And we know that being recognized as an HSI doesn't happen overnight. It is possible, particularly in our location and situation. From your perspective, what, if any, are the benefits of a place like CU Boulder becoming an HSI? Daryl.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. That's a great question. And pardon me, I had to switch over to earphones because they decided they wanted to do a very noisy lawn mowing right outside my window. I actually think that the road to becoming an HSI is more important than the destination. And I'll tell you why that is. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that embarking down this road is something that we can do immediately if we put our minds to it. It's not like we have to wait until suddenly we have 25% Latinx student population and then say, oh, now we really need to get serious about it. We need to get serious about supporting Latinx students now. The second reason why I think that it's such an important decision is that when you take a hard look at your institution from the point of student success, from the perspective of ensuring that students have the resources that they need to be successful at your university, it's actually a powerful exercise. And it's going to reveal lots about our institution that are barriers in terms of supporting Latinx students, and lots of things that are barriers to supporting all students. So in other words, what I'm saying is that when you set out with the goal of paving the way for your university to serve Hispanic students well, you're actually paving the way for your university to better serve all students. So, I'll just give you a really brief example. We have some great programs that are very dedicated to, and in some cases quite successful at supporting minoritized, racially and ethnically minoritized students, first-generation students, Pell-eligible students on our campus already. But these programs tend to be very small. And what that means is that they cannot serve all of the students who fit into those categories. So even identifying, right, that let's say only about 15% of Latinx students are currently served by CU Lead Alliance programs, right? That shows us that we have a gap in the way that we do business. So what can we do to ensure that all students who need and could benefit from wraparound academic and social support networks can take advantage of them? What we're going to need to do is think very carefully about how we deliver things like academic support, tutoring, peer academic mentors, learning assistants, so that all of our students who would benefit from these academic supports can take advantage of them. And Dr. DeLuca Fernandez, I agree with you when your point earlier was that we cannot treat all Hispanic students or all Latinx students, all Latinx students as monolithic, right? An incredibly diverse group of students. But as Nick pointed out, we do know that there are higher percentages of students who are Pell eligible or first generation, for example. So when we concentrate on thinking about what would those students need, what would they benefit from, it's ultimately going to make our entire university a stronger one.
Thanks. So before Deandra wraps us up, I also want to highlight that doing better has everything to do with what the classroom feels like, what our interactions and processes reflect, and that we're not suggesting that the quote unquote problem with this gap lies squarely with the students. I'm much more interested in addressing pedagogy. I'm much more interested in addressing peer student behaviors in the residence halls than I am saying we have to change X student. Wanted to get that in there just so that we're not stuck on some of the false narratives that might be playing in our heads. Deandra.
Yes, and I would say, although we are not a nationally recognized or designated HSI, we are an HSI with regard to the fact that we have 14% plus of Latine students. We have to serve our students. That's how we serve the state's interests as well. We think about, again, we are the flagship institution of the state of Colorado. We have a public responsibility to make sure that we're providing for and serving our students. And so for me, regardless of how quickly we are to get to the designation or the necessary numbers to get there, I hope that everything we do pours into the idea that we know that we have a student need, we know we have a community need, we know we have a national need. If we look at not just our state representation, but our national representation, our global representation of students who would identify as Latine. So how do we make sure that we continue to do that as a state institution? Diversity is certainly not a deficit, it's a dividend. All of our students and everyone who comes into contact with students that they see here at the University of Colorado benefits from those experiences and those exposures. I think about the life lessons I've learned. Certainly they've come from communities that look nothing like mine, from which I would, of course, seek and have ownership. So how do we make sure that we're trying to become a place where we see the benefits of being an HSI, even though we don't have that designation at this point? How do we align ourselves in such a manner that our students feel supported? They can look around and see themselves represented in ways that make them, again, want to be here, make them want to go out and tell the story of who we are as well. Now, what we would benefit from is there, of course, is federal funding that comes along with it so we could better support our students if we had the designation itself. So going back again to even the 4 M's, the money does matter. That would allow us to create some, or to eliminate some of the gaps and barriers to access as well if we were in fact able to reach that designation. So I hope that we continue to aim toward it, hope that we reach it. And at the same time, I hope that we continue to bolster up our resources and who we are as an institution in a way that makes our students proud of who we are and also proud of who we're working to become.
Thanks for that, Deandra. It's especially important, and you know that the national conversation too is with an emphasis on serving or servingness. And so I also want to highlight the work of Gina Garcia in this regard and encourage our participants to check out that work. I think that Marisha is going to help us now with any questions or comments from attendees.
Yes. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. There is one question here that may be for Deandra or Daryl. Are there specific mentorship efforts that any of you know of to support Latina students, undergrad or graduate?
Am I still muted? Okay. Sorry, I lost the actual screen. So yes, particularly I'm thinking about in student affairs, we have many transition and academic partnerships that do support the mentorship of students. And we also have our living learning communities, including the multicultural and Latinx LLCs that have mentorship opportunities from those students who are previously been engaged in both residence life and the campus community. We then bring them back to welcome in our new students and also help them to acclimate to the campus culture as well. We also have a lot of intentional resources that are geared out of our CIS, Center for Inclusion and Social Justice, that is also geared toward our Latine community. And those can all be found online at our CIS website as well. So yes, we partner with our academic partners, and then specifically within student affairs, we have a lot of initiatives and outreaches for our Latine community.
Yeah, and in addition to all of those programs, many of the CU Lead Alliance programs have active mentoring, including peer mentoring, but also in some cases, alumni mentoring, community mentoring programs. So, if you have specific areas of interest where you might be thinking about how to mentor Latinx students, feel free to let Dr. Mull or me know.
Another question in the chat: from each of your perspectives, can you speak to any systemic and structural barriers at CU that may contribute to the experiences of Latina students?
Nick, I'm wondering if you've had some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I will just actually kind of just reiterate a bit of what I said earlier, which is I think it's how CU specifically can engage outside of campus, out in communities across the state of Colorado. Not only are there diverse Latino communities in terms of maybe country of origin or generation here in the U.S., but also rural versus urban versus Western slope. I think just having that larger state presence, I know there's a lot of good people, University of Colorado, whether it's admissions or the advancement teams or people in community engagement who are doing this work every day. But I just think that's so important that CU goes to the communities where these students are as that sort of that point of origin to begin that engagement, to dispel misunderstandings that may exist in the community about cost, about the type of community they'll find at CU Boulder. Overcoming those challenges, I think, begins with good community engagement and going to where our students and families are at.
I would also add really understanding what are potentially the barriers that they would face. Are there community barriers coming in that we, again, to Ashley's question, Dr. Rice's question, understanding that not every student who comes in has been prepared the same way, meaning there are different cultural differences. So the idea of the cultural pieces that play into the space. And so perhaps the way one student might experience college looks very different than the way another student would. Understanding that and also putting into place, you mentioned mentorship, different resources. How do we make sure we have a layering of resources that support students where they are and also what their backgrounds are? Not every student comes in at the exact same place. And I don't mean that from a deficiency. I mean that just from cultural differences. And how do we make sure that we come into the space understanding that there is not a one size fits all? That's why diversity is a fact. And so we know that we certainly have different communities and ways we have to support them. So I do believe that we as a community have to be more aware of what some of those differences might be and how we might absolutely be supportive as they come in. Someone mentioned earlier the fact that we have quite a few students who identify as DACA. They identify their parents have different statuses and whatnot. And so it also is important for us to realize that students may come in managing a different set of expectations or having to manage a different set of priorities than our traditional in quotation marks might have to manage. So we have to be willing to also help students figure out how to navigate, how they get around the barriers that may exist for them as they navigate, and have a true understanding of what it means to be supportive of all of our students, regardless of what their backgrounds might be coming into the space.
So I think on the academic side, we're in the process of transitioning as a university. I think traditionally, we've been a university that says, we do the teaching and you do the learning and figuring out. And that is not a model that works for today. It's not a model that works for students. And particularly, it's not a model that works for historically marginalized students. So as a university, as we start to think about the learning needs of our students, and also about how they understand the value of a college education, how it's going to connect to the rest of their lives, we really have to consider that students are interested in questions like, how is this going to lead to a fulfilling and a supportive career for me? Not just, so this is not just a decision that I'm making for today or tomorrow or the next 4 years, but it's a decision that I'm making for the next 50 years of my life. And then once they are here, thinking about how we can meet students where they are, not demanding that they just be different and better prepared, but instead understanding where they are in their learning and then bringing them along. Because that's ultimately what the work of teaching is meeting students where they are and moving them forward along their path of discovery. So I think that that's generally a direction that we're beginning to embrace as a university, and that as we do so, all students will benefit, but particularly historically underrepresented students, including Latinx students, will benefit even more.
I think we have time for one more question that I see in the chat. Does a CU scholarship database exist that can be circulated to Latina students? I'm wondering about pockets of scholarships or conference travel funds, et cetera, offered by not just departments, but centers and programs that could benefit students if they wouldn't otherwise know about them.
I'm happy to take that one. There is a central scholarship database. Used to be called Academic Works. Now it's called Blackbaud, BLACKBAUD. And all scholarships should be available on the Blackbaud page. It's something that you can, that students can log into and search. In addition, since you mentioned conference travel, I would recommend the PACE program and also the University Research Opportunity Program. So Europe and PACE provide scholarships for students to do research, undergraduate students that is, and also to travel to conferences to present their work.
Florencia?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you for the space for this important discussion. I have a question. Do we have any mentoring programs that are for STEM students, STEM Latina students? And I'll explain a little more why I'm asking this.
The short answer is yes. The long answer is frequently it depends on the program. For example, I'm involved in 3 federally funded programs that sometimes it's graduate students and bridge to the doctorate program. Sometimes it's peer and learning assistance. And there are participants that range in STEM fields and disciplines. So that's the general overview.
Thank you. The reason why I'm asking, so I'm Flor, nice to meet you all. I'm an assistant professor in mathematics, and together with Dr. Patty Fuster, who's also in this call, we're organizing an event that's fully in Spanish with simultaneous translation to English on November 2nd. It's called Mates para Todos, which means math for all. And I would love to share the posters with you all so that you can help us invite undergrads at CU and in other universities and community colleges in our states. Thank you.
Yes, please send that our way. I'm going to put our office's email in the chat right now so that you can send that to us. Thank you. And I'm looking at the time. I wanted to thank our moderator, Dr. Sonia DeLuca Fernandez, and all of our panelists, Deandra, Daryl, Nick. Thank you so much for taking time out of what I'm sure are very busy days. I wanted to echo what Sonia had mentioned earlier, that HSI designation focuses on enrollment numbers, not retention, not graduation rates. And so when we talk about becoming an HSI with so much excitement, I just want to make sure that we center, what are we doing to actually serve our Hispanic students? And I also wanted to mention that this was not an exhaustive conversation. We specifically for this conversation wanted to center university administration, but we know there are many scholars on campus at CU exploring a lot of these issues. And we are exploring doing a part 2 of this conversation, possibly focusing on some more scholars at the university. And so with that, I will follow up with everyone with an email of a survey that you all can take and some upcoming events that our office is doing. And I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.